Welcome to a deep dive, into the mind of a thinker that you might not know, but should Chauncey write?
Yeah.
A 19th century American philosopher of science. And I think you'll find his ideas particularly intriguing, given your interest in philosophy.
Yeah.
While not a household name today, Wright deeply influenced big names like William James and Charles S. Peirce.
That's right. And what's really fascinating about Wright is that he offered unique spin on empiricism.
Okay.
He wasn't just content with saying all knowledge comes from experience. He went deeper, blurring the lines between everyday perception and rigorous scientific observation.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit.
Sure.
I know we have a philosopher listening in, so we can skip the Philosophy 101 definitions.
Yeah.
But how did this play out in Wright's actual thought?
Yeah.
What made his empiricism stand out?
Well, for Wright, even something as seemingly simple as seeing a red apple was a starting point for knowledge building.
Right.
But he didn't stop at just the sensory experience.
Sure.
He was interested in how we use those experiences, how we build upon them to create more complex understandings of the world.
I'm picturing a pyramid with those basic sensory observations at the base, and then Wright's thought building upwards towards these grander theories.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And for Wright, induction was the key to that building process. But again, not induction in the simplistic sense.
Right.
He saw it as a multi-layered process. Imagine a naturalist meticulously observing patterns in nature.
Okay.
Not just noting, oh, this species has these traits, but trying to figure out why those traits exist, what pressures led to their development. That's the kind of inductive reasoning Wright championed.
So it's not just about observing patterns, it's about understanding the underlying mechanism.
Yes.
The why behind the what.
Exactly. And this is where Wright's connection to positivism comes in. He was very much drawn to the rigor and clarity of scientific methods. But here's where it gets really interesting. For a philosopher like you,
Right.
didn't see scientific theories as these ultimate, unchangeable truths. He saw them more as tools, almost like grammars, for organizing our knowledge of the world.
So instead of saying this theory is the absolute truth,
Right.
it's more like saying this theory is a useful framework for understanding these observations.
Precisely. And he was very forward-thinking in this regard. He actually used the term consilience, the idea that different scientific disciplines should ultimately converge towards a unified understanding, years before E.O. Wilson popularized it.
That's pretty mind-blowing. So he was advocating for this interconnected web of scientific knowledge way back in the 19th century.
He was, which I think speaks to his deep appreciation for how knowledge is built not just in science, but in philosophy as well.
Okay, so we've got this picture of Wright as this champion of a very nuanced empiricism, deeply engaged with the scientific method,
Yeah.
but not dogmatically so.
Yes.
But where does Darwin fit into all of this? Because I know Wright was a big proponent of evolutionary theory.
He was, and he saw Darwin's work as a prime example of this principle of utility at play. Now, utility might sound like a simple word, but for Wright, it had profound implications.
Okay.
He believed that the features of an organism, whether it's a bird's wings or a human's capacity for abstract thought, develop because they serve a purpose. They help that organism thrive in its environment.
So it's not just random chance that shapes evolution. There's this driving force of utility,
Right?
pushing towards traits that are advantageous.
Right. And it's fascinating how Wright connected this back to John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism. He saw a parallel between the ethical framework of utilitarianism, which focuses on maximizing well-being, and the way nature itself seems to select for traits that increase an organism's chances of survival and reproduction.
That's a really interesting connection. It's like he's seeing utility as this fundamental principle operating across both the natural and the ethical realms.
And it brings us to a point that I think you'll find particularly thought-provoking as a philosopher,
Yeah.
Wright's rejection of natural theology.
Well, this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Back in Wright's time, the intricate order of the universe was often seen as proof of a divine designer. But Wright wasn't convinced.
Not at all.
Okay. He believed the universe was eternal, governed by natural laws, but without any inherent purpose or direction. He even coined the term counter-movements to describe how opposing forces like gravity and heat constantly shape the cosmos.
So instead of seeing order as evidence of a designer, he saw it as a result of these dynamic, ongoing processes.
Exactly, which directly challenged the prevailing theological arguments of his day. You couldn't just look at the apparent design of nature and conclude, therefore, God must exist.
As a pretty bold stance to take in the 19th century. But it seems like Wright was never one to shy away from challenging conventional wisdom.
Right.
Especially when it came to reconciling science and philosophy.
Absolutely. And this leads us to another area where I think his thinking will resonate with you. His
Okay.
view of consciousness. Okay, let's dive into that next because I know Wright had some pretty radical ideas about how consciousness evolved. But first, I think we need to give our listener a moment to digest all this incredible food for thought. We'll be back in a flash to explore the mind within the cosmos, according to Chauncey Wright. All right, we're back and ready to delve into one of the most fascinating aspects of Chauncey Wright's thought, his evolutionary perspective on consciousness. Now, I know for a philosopher, this is where things can get really exciting and potentially a bit unsettling.
It certainly is. You see, just as Wright saw the universe as this intricate dance of natural forces, he applied a similar lens to the human mind. He argued that consciousness itself emerged through the very same process of natural selection that shapes a bird's wing or a flower's petal.
So instead of viewing consciousness as a separate ethereal realm, Wright grounded it firmly in our biological nature, a product of evolution, just like any other trait.
Precisely. He believed that consciousness developed because it provided our ancestors with a survival advantage. Imagine early humans navigating a complex and challenging environment. Those who could perceive, remember, and anticipate those with a sharper awareness of themselves and their surroundings would have had a greater chance of survival.
It's fascinating to think about how something as intricate and seemingly intangible as consciousness could arise from the same forces that shape the physical world around us.
It is, and it really challenges us to reconsider some of our most fundamental assumptions about the mind. For Wright, the very distinction we make between self and world is not some inherent truth, but rather a product of evolution, a useful mental tool that helped our ancestors thrive.
So instead of seeing consciousness as this pre-existing entity that somehow gets placed into a body, Wright is suggesting it emerges from our embodied experience in the world. It's a radical departure from traditional philosophical views, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it opens up a whole new set of questions about the nature of free will, moral responsibility, and the relationship between mind and body. If our thoughts or very sense of self are shaped by evolutionary pressures, then how much control do we really have over our actions? It's a question that has plagued philosophers for centuries, and Wright's perspective adds a whole new layer of complexity.
It's almost like he's saying that even our most cherished beliefs about ourselves, our sense of agency and individuality, are ultimately rooted in this long evolutionary dance of survival and adaptation.
And that can be a difficult pill to swallow, especially for those who hold a more traditional view of the human mind. But I think Wright would argue that it's not about diminishing the importance of consciousness. It's about understanding its true nature and its place in the grand scheme of things.
It's a humbling perspective, to say the least. It reminds us that we're not separate from the natural world, but rather deeply embedded within it, both physically and mentally.
Precisely. And it highlights the importance of taking a holistic view when studying the human mind. We can't just focus on abstract concepts or internal states. We have to consider the biological, the environmental, the evolutionary forces that have shaped who we are. It's an approach that is gaining traction in contemporary philosophy of mind and cognitive science, which, as a philosophy enthusiast yourself, I'm sure you'll find fascinating.
I do, and it makes me wonder how Wright might have responded to some of the more recent developments in neuroscience and artificial intelligence. I mean, here we are creating machines that can mimic some aspects of human thought, which raises all sorts of questions about the nature of consciousness and intelligence.
I think Wright would have been thrilled by these developments. He was always eager to embrace new scientific discoveries and explore their philosophical implications. And I imagine he would have seen AI as a powerful tool for understanding the human mind, for testing our theories about how consciousness works, and perhaps even for expanding our definition of what it means to be intelligent.
That's a really interesting thought. It's like he's inviting us to view consciousness not as a static entity, but as a spectrum, a continuum that might extend beyond the boundaries of human experience.
Exactly. And it brings us back to that core principle of utility that was so central to Wright's thought. He might ask, what is the purpose of consciousness? What role does it play in the grand scheme of things? And perhaps by studying different forms of intelligence, both biological and artificial, we can begin to answer those questions.
It's a truly mind-expanding perspective, and I think it's one of the things that makes Wright's work so relevant to a modern audience. In a world where the boundaries between the natural and the artificial are becoming increasingly blurred, his evolutionary approach to consciousness offers a valuable framework for navigating these uncharted waters.
I couldn't agree more. Wright's philosophy reminds us that we're part of a much larger story, a cosmic narrative that stretches back billions of years. And by embracing this perspective, by understanding our place within this vast web of interconnectedness, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the wonders of consciousness, both our own and those that might lie beyond the horizon.
It's a beautiful and inspiring thought, and it makes me even more eager to explore the depths of Chauncey Wright's ideas. But before we wrap up our deep dive, we have one more fascinating thread to unravel Wright's unique take on the nature of knowledge itself. So stay with us as we explore how this 19th century thinker challenged traditional philosophical assumptions and offered a vision of knowledge that is as relevant today as it was back then. All right, we're back and ready to tackle the final piece of the Chauncey Wright puzzle, his perspective on knowledge itself. Now, knowing you're a philosophy enthusiast, I have a feeling this is going to be right up your alley.
It certainly is, and it's here that we see how all the threads of Wright's thought come together. His empiricism, his embrace of scientific methodology, his evolutionary lens, all of it informs his unique approach to understanding how we know what we know.
So it's not just about what we know, but the process of knowing itself.
Yeah.
How did Wright view that process?
Well, he was very much in line with the pragmatist tradition. For Wright, knowledge wasn't about grasping some absolute objective truth. It was about developing beliefs and habits of mind that were effective, that helped us navigate the world and achieve our goals.
So it's a very practical, almost utilitarian view of knowledge. It's not about possessing some abstract truth. It's about having beliefs that work, that help us solve problems and make sense of our experiences.
Exactly. And this is where his emphasis on verification comes back into play. For Wright, a belief was only truly valuable if it could be tested, if it could be confirmed or disproven through experience and observation. He saw the scientific method as the most powerful tool we have for refining our beliefs and ensuring they are grounded in reality.
It's like he's saying, don't just tell me what you believe. Show me how you arrived at that belief. Show me the evidence.
That's a great way to put it. And it highlights a key difference between Wright's approach and more traditional philosophical views. He was less interested in metaphysical debates about the nature of truth and more concerned with the practical implications of our beliefs.
So for Wright, knowledge is almost like a living, breathing thing, constantly evolving as we gather new information and test our assumptions about the world.
Precisely. And I think this dynamic view of knowledge is one of the things that makes Wright's work so relevant to us today. In a world that's constantly changing, where we're bombarded with new information every day, it's more important than ever to cultivate critical thinking skills and to be willing to revise our beliefs in light of new evidence.
It's a call to intellectual humility, to recognize that we don't have all the answers, and to be open to new perspectives and new ways of understanding the world.
Absolutely. And it's a perspective that I think aligns well with your own philosophical interests. It encourages us to be active participants in the knowledge-building process, to engage in thoughtful inquiry, and to embrace the uncertainty and complexity of the world around us.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the mind of Chauncey Wright, what would you say is the most important takeaway for a philosopher listening in? What's the one nugget of wisdom they should carry with them from this exploration?
I think the most important thing to remember about Wright is his insistence on grounding our beliefs and experience and testing them through rigorous inquiry. He reminds us that knowledge is not a static possession, but a dynamic process of exploration and discovery. And he encourages us to approach that process with a blend of intellectual curiosity, humility, and a commitment to seeking truth wherever it may lead.
It's a powerful message, and one that feels particularly relevant in our current age of information overload and competing narratives. Chauncey Wright may not be a household name, but his ideas offer a timeless guide for navigating the complexities of knowledge and belief in a world that's constantly evolving. So to our listener out there, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of ideas. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a mind that matters.